Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, Velocities in Music, the best kept secret in music reviews. I love indie records. I love indie records that are fun, have good songwriting, and just kind of laid back. The record we're going to review today, Tom, would you say is that?
It is all of those things.
Salad Days by Mac DeMarco, the second album from the Canadian singer-songwriter, indie musician. What bands would you compare Mac DeMarco? What other artists would you compare Mac DeMarco
I would
to?
say a little bit like Deer Hunter.
Yes, I definitely got a Bradford Cox.
Yeah, I also got a little bit of like more in the attitude and approach, maybe like Ariel Pink.
Yes.
Maybe a tad bit even of Ween in there.
Yeah.
I don't think it sounds incredibly a lot like any of those things, but more just in the mood, and I think that the kind of demographic that this would appeal to if you're into those kinds of artists, I would assume that you'd probably enjoy Mac.
You mean pot smokers? Why don't you just call them what they are?
I did not say that.
Okay.
I absolve myself of all responsibility.
Fair enough. So, I mean, I'm putting this album on, I think you realize right away that the first track, Salad Days, the self-titled track on this record, is fantastic. I mean, from the moment that this album opens up, you get this just catchy-ass vocal melody and guitar melody, and then the chorus is fantastic. This album just hits you in the face, and you instantly fall in love with what Mac DeMarco is presenting you. I mean, the sound of Salad Days is quite simply like one of my favorite things I've heard in a long time. I can't get enough of that song. However, I think that was the initial intrigue for me anyways with this album, and the more I listened to this, I was really into that first, 4 tracks or so, Salad Days, Blue Boy, Brother, Let Her Go, and you have this almost neo-psychedelic Beatles-esque. It's like they took what the Beatles were doing in like the Revolver, even Sgt. Pepper days, and he's just trying to revive this sound with a little bit more emphasis on vocal. I would say more guitar melodies than anything.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the one thing about Salad Days, the album, is that there's just beautiful gems of guitar melodies throughout this thing.
Very much so, and a lot of times they're playing off each other and almost kind of dueling. You have
nice bass parts.
Yeah.
Too.
The bass is great, and one thing that really made me think that this was thrown back to kind of that Beatles era is right away I noticed listening in headphones that the bass is like hard pan to one side, and that was something that they did all the time in the 60s. So he's definitely, even in the production techniques, he's pulling from that. And also just kind of in the melody construction, the general just aesthetic and sheen of the sound. Now, it's produced to be a little bit more modern, but there's not really any way around that these days. So it kind of comes down to the way that he's writing the songs.
Unless you don't try to produce your album at all, you're pretty much going to have some sort of production. You have to go for something. I mean, you have to have some idea or motif in the production.
One thing that he does, though, that's a little bit, almost kind of rebels against the kind of clean sound of the 60s that we were talking about, is he just throws a lot of weird, like, key changes and accidentals and dissonant notes in there. Particularly, I want to point out the closing track, Johnny's Odyssey, which is an instrumental track. I think it was a cool way to close the album.
I really think it's cool when artists choose to do that.
Yeah, and it just works. And that album, there's a bass note that he hits that's just way off. And it's at first I was like, oh, it's such a sour note. But as it keeps cycling through that riff, it's just the way it needs to be. And I think that shows a good attention to songwriting detail and the way that all the instruments are coming together to create a sound. I think that's pretty cool. I mean, he also keeps these songs pretty short. You mentioned Salad Days, kicks right into it. Really, the first thing you hear is the beginning of the lyrics.
Right.
And it kind of leads in, and the instrumentals come in a split second after that. But
I mean, quite a statement.
It does, because there's no intro, there's no leading into it. It's just bam, just you're thrown right into the deep end of Salad Days right from the get-go. And from that point, there's no mistaking the sound or the style that he's going for.
Right, absolutely. And I think that that general sound describes most of the tracks in the song. However, on the back half, there's 2 tracks in particular. Track 7, Passing Out Pieces, and track 9, Chamber of Reflection.
Yeah.
There's no references in those titles. But those 2 tracks specifically use a lot of synthesizers. Where there's really not a lot of synthesizer anywhere on this album.
I totally agree. And I noticed it more in Chamber of Reflection than I did Passing Out Pieces. I found that when I got to that track, I thought, this isn't a bad track, but it just doesn't seem to fit.
I thought that about both tracks. I think I think Passing Out Pieces kind of fits a bit more with the sound of the album, just because it's a bit more intense. It's a bit more, upbeat with those focus on melodies. Where Chamber of Reflection is a bit more not the same level of intensity.
No, not at all.
So those two songs I just felt kind of like stuck out like a sore thumb at times. In general, I found that the strength of this album just went downhill after the opening track, the self-titled track. I enjoyed numerous tracks on this record. It's just most of them were on the front half of this record. And then as the record progresses, I've heard these ideas over and over again. And then he introduces some new ones with the two tracks with the synthesizers, and it just doesn't seem to fit at all. And really, I just felt that none of these tracks, were that expansive. None of these this is only a 34.5-minute long album. So when you think about an album that size, it really needs to make its impact quickly. It needs to make its impact, and then in very cohesive statements. And this album doesn't really make a cohesive statement at all. It's just a collection of 11 tracks that are, nicely written, loosely thrown together. It's very laid back. It's like Mac DeMarco is just putting on a private little show for you of these collection of songs that he has, these singer-songwriter songs. And at the end of Johnny's Odyssey, the closing track, he even says, thanks for listening. And it has that little, clip of him saying that. And I think that's a nice way to close, but it does kind of confirm that the biggest problem I think with this album is just scope. It wasn't meant to be
exactly.
anything
And it is endearing. There's a lot of authenticity to it, but I think that you're right. I think that he kind of cornered himself. And what I mean by that is that you think about what he did, and you have to consider, if you're going to be critiquing something, well, what could they have done better? And I find that this is one of those albums where even if I take the complete opposite of what I didn't like, I still think it's a problem. And what I mean by that is, it's only 34 minutes. It's not very long, not very much
But did you know it was only 34 minutes? To me, it felt a lot longer.
But that's the thing is, even if he did make it longer, it wouldn't have made it better.
No,
it wouldn't have made it better.
Right.
And you can say, well, the songs sound too much alike. There should have been more variety. But the couple points where he did try to provide variety, we pointed out that it didn't fit. So it's
like
kind
a
of
Pandora's box.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
And I don't have. This is why I critique music. I don't actually make it. Well, that's not true. But I don't make a profession out of making music myself, because I don't really have an answer for this guy. Just how he's approaching writing these songs. He's not doing anything. He's doing something that it's nice to listen to, but this has been done for decades and decades and decades. So it's not like he's doing anything truly new. And while I enjoy some of the songs, it doesn't go much farther than that for me. I really do feel like this felt like much more than a 34.5-minute long listen. And at that point, I just kind of go, and same thing, if he would have just made it longer, it wouldn't have added any value. It was to his benefit to make it short. These are big red flags for me as far as the album listening experience. Cool ideas, a couple good tracks, but other than that, I was a little underwhelmed on this.
And I think I'm a little bit higher than you, but what's funny is we have a lot of the same criticisms. I think what it comes down to for me is just that I was getting a little bit more wrapped up in the intricacies within the instrumentals. I love the way that the guitar and drums interplay and the way that the melodies sit on top of it. That's like candy to me.
And I love that. I love that too. I've listened to this I've listened to this a lot, and then because it's so short, you can listen to it in a short amount of time. So I got a few more listens in, and man, each listen it just kind of went a little lower. I probably started in the upper 70s, maybe even around 80, and then kind of came down on it. As I just some of these tracks just did not stick with me. So that being said, I think I'm going to score this at 68.
I'm going 74.
Okay, so low 70s from us. Generally, that's below our average. Our average of our bell curve of all 750 albums we've reviewed is 77. So if it's below 77, we probably don't want to put a big recommended stamp on this. However, the track Salad Days, you got to listen to that song. It's a great song. And a lot of you guys are out there. You've requested this from us. You wanted to see what Tom and I thought of this album. So clearly you guys are digging this album. What about Salad Days did you like that maybe we missed out on or overanalyzed? Because we might have a tendency.
We do that sometimes.
We do that every now and then. Leave us a comment. www.velocitiesmusic.com or youtube.com/velocitiesmusic. As always, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and in all of these venues, let us know what albums you'd like to see us review on this channel, because you guys determine what we review. I'm Jay.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV moving music critique forward.